On our agenda, the next point on our agenda is a conversation with Rechter Edwin Cameron. Edwin, are you with us?
Definitely, Ernest, and quite fascinated by LaRue's and Nico's contributions, and looking forward to our quick chat.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, I think we can take the pressure off a little bit and just have a conversation, because it's been a pretty interesting few months for everyone. So maybe this is a moment to pause and just converse. For those who think that I'm disrespectful, Edwin signs all of his emails with Edwin. So I am going to stick with Edwin instead of a title, because there are too many titles and it's going to mess me up. All right. Edwin, congratulations firstly on your appointment as Chancellor for Stellenbosch University. With everything that's been going on in 2020, lots of moving parts, are you now officially with your feet under the desk?
Indeed, Ernest. Al sedert Oktober verlede jaar toe die verkiesing plaasgevind het. Ek is nog nie ingehuldig nie, en dit is as gevolg van die lockdown. So there'll be an inhuldiging at some point, but I am Chancellor and I have been for almost a year. I did my first online graduation award of degrees in April. And we'll have to see whether the graduation ceremonies in 2 months' time will be in person.
Excellent. Is there any way that we can get your inauguration in the quad? Is there any way we can arrange that?
I can command it.
Superb. That sounds like a party. Edwin, I've been fascinated reading up on your journey. Pretoria, Queenstown, Pretoria, Stellenbosch, Oxford. Not a typical story at all. Certainly not for a person from that time. How did your early days, you know, lay the foundation for a career in law as an activist, an author, and a leader? Your early days, how did that actually contribute to, you know, how your career grew?
Ek sal nou die vraag beantwoord, Ernest, maar ek wil eers ietsie sê oor Wilgenhof. Christoph Pau was die primarius toe ek in 72 in die plek gekom het, dis lang terug. En hy het my oor die naweek herinner that the year before our first year group started at Wilgenhof, there was a terrible incident at Huis Visser, where a first-year student broke his neck during the doop. And the result was that the university clamped down. The Kremlin, as we freely called it then, clamped down. And so our doop was rigorously controlled. There were no abuses. You didn't have to drink basins full of water. You weren't beaten. There was a lot of rigor. There was a lot of humor. My main memory of the doop was the heat, because we had to wear jackets and ties, and I didn't come prepared for Stellenbosch in February. I'd never been in Stellenbosch before, but the humor as well. And we were 63 first years, and I have deep bonds with many of those first years still. My colleague in the Constitutional Court, Johan Froneman, was one of them, and many others. So I want to make the point that the abuses returned, unfortunately. And I think the Kremlin has been rightly struggling with Wilgenhof to keep the abuses out, to keep the good parts of the doop. I was asked to come and speak to Wilgenhof. I've still got the speech which I can give to Nico and to you about the constitutionalization, die grondwetlikheid van die doop. And I said that as long as it's consensual, properly informed in material respects, not in all details, that it can proceed. And the same seems to me to be true of the Nachtligter, that if there is informed consent, then it can proceed. But the point I want to make before coming to your question, Ernest, en ek gaan nie so langdradig wees vir die res van ons kwartiertjie nie, is that Wilgenhof was quite pivotal to me. It was a very affirming and enriching experience, an experience of camaraderie, of comradeship, and of community. And of course, Wilgenhof was in the lead in being honors, in being averechts, in being a maverick residence. And I'm very proud of those aspects of it. And those are the aspects that I would be proud of as Chancellor of Stellenbosch. To answer your question much more concisely, Ernest, I was a poor kid, grew up partly in a children's home, broken home. My poverty, my race as a white kid, I got a big break going to Pretoria Boys High, then getting a scholarship to come to Wilgenhof and Stellenbosch, fully paid scholarship. Couldn't have afforded it otherwise. And of course, being in the closet in Wilgenhof, my homosexuality, later becoming infected with HIV, those are the four features of my life that have determined my political program and my humanity. All of those things, my experience of race and of poverty and of stigma in the various ways. And my experience of Wilgenhof was definitely my best friend in Wilgenhof. Unlike me, I've never been perceptibly gay according to gay stereotypes. My best friend was Jan de Kok, and he died of AIDS in 1987. And Christoph will remember him. Jan was opsigtelik verwyfd. And he was elected to the Huiskom in the year that I was elected primarius. And I'm still proud of that fact, that no one in Wilgenhof said, Jan is a moffie. He wanted to be archivaris. He was a very fine archivaris. And I'm proud of Jan, and I'm proud of Wilgenhof for that.
That's, you know what, you've just messed up all of my questions. I actually prepared for this conversation. You've messed it up.
I'm delighted, Ernest.
Thank you for that. Look, I think that what you touch on are actually core to what Wilgenhof is about. It's about stepping away from the singular into what the strength of the group can be. Last I saw you in person was at the Woordfees, right? And you had a fascinating conversation with a supremely impressive man, Mr. George Bezos. And I actually remember the conversation very, very well. And it made me think about asking you, in your career, lawman, jurist, activist, passionately so, author, academic, leader, throughout your career, your life, who were those little angels sitting on your shoulder giving you guidance? And this, I think, is directed sort of towards the young people on this line, listening in about, and how to use your network. Who was on your shoulder?
It's a good question, Ernest, because I craved mentorship, and I was mentored at Pretoria Boys High by Hugo Ackerman. I was mentored to get to Stellenbosch by Professor V.R. Joubert, who was born in bachelors. His father was the first inwonende hoof in the early 1900s. And he got me and his son in. Daar's 'n storie daarachter wat ek nie nou sal vertel nie. So I've had great mentorship from men and women, and people. I must say, all of our generation are probably now. The best thing that we can do is to return that mentorship. I was invited to Wits by a human rights lawyer called Professor John Dugard, who was also a Wilgenhoffer. And John Dugard was the first academic he and Professor Tony Matthews, to write incisively about the iniquities of apartheid law. And he started doing that from 1969. And I'm proud that John Dugard, who's now a very renowned international lawyer in his 80s, that he was also a Wilgenhoffer. So there's been a whole tradition I'm not saying only left-wing Wilgenhoffers, because Albert Herzog was a far right-wing white supremacist. He was also a Wilgenhofer. But there's been a long tradition of Wilgenhoffers fighting for dignity and justice for all South Africans. And John Dugard was one of my mentors. Not, I don't think, because I was also in Wilgenhof. That was a coincidence we discovered later.
That is absolutely superb. So if I said to you that I'm passionate about getting the Wilgenhof archief sorted out and getting these names back into the conversation because of the contributions made, I'm assuming I'm speaking to I'm preaching to the converted.
Absolutely, Ernie. I'm with you there.
Yeah, no, 100%. Right. So I'm going to just sort of jump into what Nico touched on, because he did touch on, you know, what's happening at Stellenbosch, and I think there's a lot of merit in what's happening, all right? Because it's time for us to have some really good conversations and some solid conversations again. I can ask you about Wilgenhof and what role Wilgenhof has in the next 10 years in a Stellenbosch, but I probably want to ask you, what do you want to see happen at Stellenbosch University in the next 10 years, as you know, from your role as Chancellor?
Well, that's a lovely question, Ernie, because Nico has already said it, that we have to go about it deliberately. Ons moet as prins te werk gaan om te verseker dat Wilgenhof meer inklusief word. And that involves an individual effort on us as ou manne, and also an effort on the part of Spurgeon Wilson, who has just taken over. And I was delighted to meet him last night. Spurgeon's also a lawyer, so I can ook beswadder hier bietjie. So the goals that Nico set out, a deliberate attempt at inclusivity, a deliberate commitment to inclusivity. And I'm really pleased to say that we've got an outstanding rector in Wim de Villiers. He's a brilliant physician, gastroenterologist. He's a very fine academic. He could have stayed in North Carolina as a professor of medicine there. He came back to South Africa, headhunted by UCT, and then came to Stellenbosch. And Wim is an outstanding administrator, and he's a visionary. And his vision is that Stellenbosch should be more inclusive. And his vision is that Stellenbosch should be an absolutely outstanding university. And that's happening. Stellenbosch is moving up the international rankings. UCT and WITS, I had a long association with WITS from the 1980s. I was chairman of council there. And I'm really glad to say that Stellenbosch is now biting at the heels of WITS and UCT. And I want to say something about race, Ernest, because I was chairman of council at WITS between the end of 1997 and 2008, which were the very years in which WITS changed from a majority white university to a majority black university. And WITS has retained its international rankings. The first black vice chancellor of WITS was Loyiso Nonga. And he said, why should we speak about maintaining standards? We should speak about improving standards. And I think that's going to happen as well at Stellenbosch. One of the difficulties which has also confronted me as chancellor was the language policy. And Wim and the Senate and the council changed the language policy. You can still come to Stellenbosch and get your entire first year tuition in Afrikaans, which I'm very pleased about, because you also have to think that most Afrikaans speakers aren't white. So Stellenbosch should be doing more. Die landelike bruin man, die landelike bruin vrou, die werkerstand bruin man en vrou, young man and vrou, should also have their paths eased to Stellenbosch. So I'm glad about the retention of Afrikaans as a significant feature of Stellenbosch tuition. But at the same time now, if you're black, as jy bruin is and you don't want your tuition in Afrikaans, you can now get all your undergraduate tuition in English. And I think that's a good compromise. But at the same time, I think Gelyke Kanse, who are critical of me for certain reasons, I think that they should remain active to ensure that Stellenbosch's Afrikaans component remains real.
You know what, I couldn't agree more. But you know, Wilgenhof is not about agreement, it's also about critical thinking. You did touch on something now, and we're moving towards the end of our conversation for the purpose of time. I do want to reiterate what you just said oor die belang van landelike mense wat ook 'n plekkie in die son het en Wilgenhof in sy eie plasings. Ek dink werklik waar dat wat Nico vroeër gesê het is verskriklik belangrik dat ons hoë kwaliteit mense van alle stande moet kry om 'n geleentheid te kry en ons moet ons oop hou vir daai sterre. Because Wilgenhof there's a place for people in Wilgenhof to grow. Yeah.
And ons moet die moeite doen, Ernie. We've got to take trouble. It's not going to happen by magic. We've actually got to go out and do the hard work of recruitment, identification, encouragement, and of course, which the Bond also does, providing beurse. Very important.
Excellent. Edwin, last question. 2021. What's the bucket list for Edwin Cameron, the person? What is it that you're going to slam dunk in 2021?
No particular program, Ernie. Well, let's hope that we can travel more easily, both internally. The most important things are that I see in our country is maintenance of the constitutional values. We should not have hungry kids in our country. We've got enough food in our country, and yet we've got hungry kids. That should change. And maintenance of excellence in all we do, university excellence. We've had a serious collapse of independent institutions under the Zuma administration. There's a lot of work to be done. And I feel very grateful, Ernie. I'm turning 68 early next year, and it will be 49 years since I started at Wilgenhof, that first year of February 1972. And I'm really grateful still to be involved. I'm inspecting judge of prisons, the chancellorship at Stellenbosch, and other public interest commitments give me a sense of involvement. And so my bucket list is to remain involved, to remain active, to remain enthusiastic in ook om 'n humorsin te behou.
Superb. Edwin, I can't say thank you enough, and we certainly hope to see you in the course soon, maybe for lunch.